Could it be that just losing 10% is fatal for most of us? And this program of action is in the back of our mind. You spend less so as not to put yourself at risk. The gap between the rich and the poor cannot grow indefinitely, and at some point the poor realize. Welcome to the Coin Post channel. When coronavirus was just beginning, I did not believe in its possible catastrophic consequences. And I'm not afraid to admit my mistake, because at that time the analysis of the situation was based on the experience of previous outbreaks of similar infections. COVID-19 is not the first coronavirus. Humanity has known this group of diseases since the 60s, and today there are 7 kinds. Why then did we encounter a world pandemic? And how did the previous 6 coronaviruses go unnoticed? There's evidence that the virus itself was not as bad as our reaction to it. Closing borders, limiting the movement of citizens, breaking trade relations, and other measures to beat the pandemic have led to the world economy being at risk of an unprecedented crisis. And as I initially did not believe in the horrors of the coronavirus, now I don't believe that the quarantine end will automatically cancel all problems, and the world will again become the same as it was before. You, my dear viewer, can ask a logical question. If you made a mistake, what makes you think you're right now? I'd say that I don't have to be, and it will be just perfect if what I'm going to tell you later in this video never takes place. But my conclusions are based on global economy recovery statistics, and it's far from being satisfactory. I'm inviting everyone new to our channel to click the subscribe button and join the best community on YouTube. Let's start. The day before I was making this video, there was another bottom in the US stock market. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones indices keep going up, and the Nasdaq Composite actually returned to the historical maximum price. Similar stock market recovery processes are taking place in Europe and Asia, and the Chinese economy is the main trigger for growth. After all, the Celestial Empire took the first coronavirus blow. They had a rigorous quarantine, which actually stopped all the production, and as you know, China is a factory for the whole world. And now there is a new wave of positivity, because the Chinese economy has regained 90% of pre-crisis production. It would seem that there's just 10% to get back on track. But what if it only appears to be insignificant? Could it be that just losing 10% is fatal for most of us? These statistics are taken from the Economist, and we must pay tribute to them for addressing the problem. So, with the official decline in the Chinese economy by only 10% after quarantine, we have a 50% drop in consumer activity. Also, the current occupancy of hotels is less than 50%. Passenger air traffic fell by as much as 75%. So our fellow Warren Buffett knew something when he was selling airline shares. These 10% of the total economy, which resulted in a fall of 50 and 75% in specific industries, can be triggered by a simple protective measure called social distancing. Just don't stand in the checkout line in a store closer than 1.5 meters to the next person. Imagine how huge the line could get. Would you like to stand in it? Given this distance, restaurants and cafes will be able to have fewer visitors, but they are still not full. People finish work and don't follow the usual route of entertainment. They rush home, where it's safe, comfortable, and they have something to do. Because during quarantine they develop new habits, and it doesn't imply wasting money. Does this mean that quarantine was to blame for everything and that countries like Sweden and Belarus, which refused to introduce it, were right? Let's get a closer look at it. We cannot fail to mention the saying of the Belarusian president Lukashenko, "What are we gonna eat?" So with one phrase he explained that the pandemic consequences could be a small problem compared to quarantine itself. And the Swedish government has precisely the same reasoning, as they didn't introduce any restrictions. Here it would be right to make a small digression and point out that Sweden has an extremely high mortality rate from coronavirus compared to global figures, even if we take into account that several countries hide the real data. But let's not get carried away. The fact is that at the very beginning of the pandemic and now, when the statistics did not please the Swedish authorities, they still did not introduce any restrictions. People were asked to wear masks and maintain personal hygiene, but that was it. They were not forced to sit at home, did not shut down cafes, did not restrict movement within the country, and so on. Moreover, in neighboring Denmark, where all these restrictions were placed, consumer spending fell by 30%, and in Sweden, with no quarantine, population spending fell by 25%. In part, this is due to the closure of other countries' borders and the fact that tourists couldn't get into Sweden. But it was the Swedes who made most of the cost reduction, although no one asked for it. But given how the whole world was terrified with a new virus, people began to limit themselves. And this program of action is in the back of our mind. You spend less so as not to put yourself at risk. And it's suitable for one particular person or family. The first rule of financial literacy in the way to prosperity sounds like: learn to control your expenses and remove unnecessary spending. The fact that people stopped buying unnecessary things or started eating at home is right specifically for them, but not for business and not for the economy, first of individual countries and then the whole world. Because our society is based on constant consumption. We have long been consuming much more than we really need. And it's been pushing the economy forward, forcing us to increase production. Next, we will analyze why many economists are talking about the next wave of bankruptcies. But first, I wanna thanks to those who are watching this video, ask you to support the channel with a thumbs up, subscribe and turn on the notifications if you haven't done it yet, so as not to miss our new videos. Small businesses have already gone into bankruptcy in China. Medium and large ones will probably follow them too. They just have a higher safety margin. The United States and Europe are lagging behind with these processes because they began to lift quarantine later. But today we can see a decrease in the real money circulation of the economy. Everything is happening according to the following scenario. Let's say there's a small chain of 3 restaurants that were closed during the quarantine, and during this time they beat costs without any income. When the restrictions were lifted, people didn't get the restaurants packed to the rafters. The profits were not near as much as they expected, and therefore the business owner was forced to reduce the staff and then close 1 or even 2 restaurants at once. Thus, he would increase the number of unemployed, pay fewer taxes, property owners wouldn't get the expected money for rent, and it will also begin to reduce costs. And it goes round and round, because in the current version of the world economy, everything is interconnected. The closure of a small street coffee shop automatically reduces the demand for coffee and disposable tableware. Therefore, suppliers and manufacturers have to fire one of their employees. All these people no longer go to work, which affects the income of careers, and then they buy less fuel and spend less money on updating and maintaining their fleet. The dependence of careers on demand is best seen in the aviation industry. Airlines are already reducing staff because there's no one to transport, and as a result, the Boeing airline giant began to lay off employees as the demand for new planes fell sharply, which in turn could affect the metallurgical, chemical, and electrical industries. An important issue is that the consequences of a pandemic will primarily hit people who had low-paying jobs. It's sellers, waiters, cashiers, handymen, and so on. But such people make the vast majority, and most of them have absolutely no savings. Each country has its own response to this challenge, but be it cash benefits or call to tighten their belts, in any case, the problem won't be solved. And sooner or later, we'll face a situation of widespread riots, which can result in a cardinal change in the political and social structure of the world we know. By the way, even before the 2020 crisis, another world's richest man, Ray Dalio, spoke about this. The gap between the rich and the poor cannot grow indefinitely, and at some point the poor realize they outnumber the rich and represent real power. And how this unfolds is pretty easy to learn from the history of the 20th century. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. It's the Coin Post channel. Subscribe and get enlightened.